being with us. I know we had an amazing interactive lunch with Clara and the team, and we heard from Levent in our last keynote. So I'm excited to introduce our two featured speakers here with us today. So Ariam Mogos is a K12 Futurist Fellow at the Stanford D School K12 Lab, and she is a Futurist Fellow where she designs prototypes with the K12 educators on how to engage, evaluate, and create with emerging technologies grounded in ethics and digital agency. Like, coolest job ever. And she is joined by her colleague, Jessica Brown, and Jess is an organizer and educator dedicated to creating education models where Black and Brown learners can thrive from cradle to grave. She is a designer with the K12 Lab team at the Stanford D School with Ariam. And they are going to be sharing with us today in a Create Style session. So with that, Ariam and Jess, I will turn it over to you, and I will be live in the chat messaging, and I'll send over any questions that your attendees have. So thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, for that introduction. To kick it off, we would love to hear from you all and just connect. What's your name? Where do you work? And what's lighting you up right now by the conference? So if you could drop that in the chat for us, that would be great. We'll leave this up on the screen for 10 or 15 seconds. So drop that in the chat for us. We'd love to hear from you and learn how your experience is thus far. And while you do that, we're going to give you a little bit of background on the Stanford K12 Lab. So some of you may be familiar with the work at the Stanford K12 Lab, but if you're not, what we do is really build the capacity and creative confidence of everyone in the K12 education space. And our goal is really to obliterate opportunity gaps in education by designing different types of experiments, projects, that really support equitable models for sharing design approaches with students and educators. And really our goal is to co-create those approaches with educators and students, which is why we're really excited to be here with you today. A couple of ways that we do that is we actively experiment. So we're constantly reaching out to different communities and thinking about how we can design different experiments that think about old and new challenges in education. We're creating and sharing resources that can hopefully address some of these challenges and turn these resources into really accessible materials. And then we're really focused on supporting the field and supporting K-12 communities by doing professional development and building the creative capacity of educators to be confident about their capacity around design and innovation. So to kick it off and to keep learning a little bit more about you and get into our topic about the intersections of culture and code, we're going to kick off with a little stoke, which is called Origin Story. So we're going to ask everyone to put in the chat the story behind your name. So what does it mean? How did you get it? And really, what does it mean to you, your family, or your community? So if you could share just one to three sentences about the origin story of your name, that would be terrific.
Yeah,
and we'll
as folks are beginning to think about that, I'm going to read some of the beginning introductions. We heard from John, who's at the Columbus College of Art and Design. John, I'm from Ohio, so love CCAD. We heard from Bob, who teaches at Game Design and Digital Arts at Durham School of the Arts. We heard from Kay, who works at the Canadian Academy in Japan. A lot of folks are lit up by all the participants that they've met so far. Oh, hey, Meredith, also at Cleveland, Ohio. Love that. Oh, wait, Cleveland STEM High School in Seattle, Washington, my bad. So yeah, it's great to hear from all of you coming from so many different places. And yeah, we'd love to learn more about who you are and your names and what it means to you.
Thanks for sharing that, Jess. I can't see the chat, so I love hearing who's here with us.
Yeah, starting to share some of the name stories. We have a Horvath is a stranger in Hungarian. So it's the Hungarian version of Smith.
Cool.
Someone shared that their name is an anglicized Dutch name. They were the only family with it in Eastern Canada, which is kind of cool. And that their great-grandfather immigrated from Holland. Ariam, tell us the story of your name.
Oh, so my family's from a country called Eritrea in the Horn of Africa, and I have a biblical name. And my grandfather, my mother's father, gave me the name, and it means, so there are a lot of heavens in the sky, and my name means the heaven that God sits on. So essentially the gates of heaven. And that's how I got my name and what it means.
That's beautiful. I've never asked you this question. We always ask other people, but we never ask each other.
Oh, I feel like I don't know why I thought I told you this story before.
Yeah, it's beautiful. We heard from someone whose name is Quilin. Oh, pronounced like quiet. Quiet. Okay. And without the ET. So yeah, Quilin. And their mom told them that they got their name from the encyclopedia in the library. They're adopted from China, and their mother and family are all from East Pennsylvania. Very small white town, but full of good people.
Very cool. That's a great story behind a name. And speaking of that, names are very much wrapped in culture. And I'm excited to hand it over to you, Jess, to share a little bit about the role that culture plays in our lives and in our learning.
Yeah, thanks, Ariam. Let's get into it, folks. So culture. I was able to do some really powerful work over the past year with Zaretta Hammond, who literally wrote the book on culture and its impact in our brains. A lot of thinking and creating around the importance that culture plays in how we learn, and how culture and neuroscience and social science are all so intricately intertwined. So just a quick definition of what even is culture. Culture is the norms, behaviors, and beliefs that bind a group together. So our brains have been collecting and connecting information through the lens of our culture, so those norms, behaviors, and beliefs, since we were born. So we are always starting from this place of learning through culture. Just a quick note that culture is not, in this case, a synonym for race. And everybody has a culture. So sometimes when we talk about things like culturally responsive teaching, folks immediately have this predisposed notion that is, oh, that's for the Black and brown kids, yeah, basically that's for a certain type of student and a certain type of learner. And we really want to dispel that the culture is how we all learn. It is the software to our brain's hardware, to use our tech analogy here. Next slide, please, Ariam. So digging deeper into it, right? Our brain is a collection of all these neural pathways and connections. It's this big like lump of organic material, and it's like a computer. You know, it's an ever-growing network. It collects all this information. It helps us make meaning of the world around us. So as I said before, culture being the software to the brain's hardware really means that it is constantly updating and making some of those connections, and it helps us store some of the prior knowledge that we have and figure out, okay, what can we possibly connect this to? Oh, and Ariane, you can keep those playing as, yeah, that's perfect. So yeah, this is just an image showing the power of all those connections that just live within us. Next slide, please. So like I said before, we have all these different kind of ways and folders in which we store the different cultural information. Everything we learn and experience needs to find some connection to stick to within our brains, or else our brain is going to discard it. That's called pruning. It's what a healthy brain does. So if you think about moments where you're like, oh, I really am forgetting that one thing, I know I just learned it, that's because your brain didn't have somewhere through your cultural lens to connect it to, didn't have that correct folder to file it within, and then didn't think it was necessary. So it's like, okay, we need space for more learning, more information. We're gonna push that to the side. We're gonna, click the little trash button that we have on our computers, and that's gonna go away. So yeah, these folders are called schema, and that holds all of the different information that we learn and that we experience and that we need to connect. Next slide, please. Great. So this is so important for learning because as students, as learners, even as adults, we all have to find something to connect all new learning to. If we don't connect that new learning, it just won't stick, right? So students and we all learn best when we have the support to connect this new information within our existing files and folders, right? And our brain has the ability to then process and organize this information. So yeah, we have to be able to connect new knowledge to some part of our current existing knowledge and our existing file and folder system that we've created through the lenses of our culture. And if not, it just won't stick. Next slide, please. So at the heart of it, learning cannot and does not happen absent of culture. Even if that's not recognized, it is happening. Part of what I'm sharing is kind of making a process that's quite subconscious or unconscious, conscious, right? So this is happening whether we're actively thinking about it or not. Within the space of this webinar and workshop, we're going to be digging into making some of this a more conscious process for us, but it's always happening. So as we approach in education, approaching it through the lens of our culture isn't a nice to have. So again, going back to one of my earlier points, that culturally responsive teaching is not a nice to have. It is the foundation of how we learn. Therefore, we really have to begin to think and understand more of these cultural processes so that information and experiences can be sticky for ourselves and for students, and so that our brain capacity and processing power can grow. So that's a little primer on why culture is so important in learning. There's so much more information that we're going to be digging into and sharing throughout the rest of the presentation, but Ariane's going to start to share, what does this have to do with emerging tech? Beyond my little metaphor around culture being the software to the brain's hardware, what does this have to do with code, Ariane?
Yeah. And as we get into where culture and code really do come at a crossroads, let's take like 1 minute for reflections on the amazing material just shared out. If you have thoughts, reflections, they might already be going into the chat, but if you do have thoughts on what you just heard, what just shared, please definitely do drop them in the chat. And so while you're doing that, I'm going to kind of ease into what just shared about culture and how that really intersects with code and what I mean by code. So today we're in a world where emerging technologies like AI and machine learning are advancing at an incredible rate. And emerging technologies are a new medium that everyone should be participating in, creating and shaping, because they are shaping our society and our future. It's evident by all the different types of technologies we're all using every day that are becoming more ubiquitous and becoming more common. But these technologies really are designed by a few. They're not really designed by everyone. And this is starting to cause some harm, and it's really representative in the technologies themselves. This image that you see to the right is it's a photograph from a beauty contest that was actually decided by an AI beauty bot that judged around, had 600 participants entered the contest, and the AI bot judged the 600 participants, and amongst the winners, they were primarily Caucasian, and then a few Asian winners, and so there was very little diversity in what was considered beautiful across deemed by the AI bot. And as we know, beauty and attraction is cultural as well. And so if the technologies we're creating are not representative of various cultures and people's backgrounds, then many people are going to be excluded, and that's exactly what's happening. And these technologies are also going to start to shape certain narratives, right, about beauty and other parts of culture for the entire world. And that's why everyone really needs to participate. That's really important. But right now, these technologies are not culturally accessible. And part of the reason is the way that we're teaching about technology. And that's definitely at the one part of the root of the problem. So if we really want students to learn how to design with emerging technologies, if we want all students to participate, we really need to, as just said, tap into their schema, tap into their cultural knowledge and their identities. And we need that to happen because we need our current and future technologies to be more representative of everyone, so that globally our technologies are as equitable as possible. So to experiment with this concept, we're going to play around with bots. And this is going to be a hands-on activity that we're all going to get involved in. So bots are everywhere. You may be familiar with Alexa, the Amazon speakers, smart speakers. You may be familiar with one of the oldest bots, Siri, created by Apple. There's also chat bots. Those are bots as well. So bots are really just, they might be called personal assistants, and they're powered by AI and machine learning. And bots help us do a lot of different things. They usually help us with different types of requests. Everything from, helping us with a calendar, or helping us with, ordering groceries, or helping us with recipes, or helping us play music, or helping us make calls. Bots help us do a lot of different things. And bots also have access to a lot of information. So we know that bots are being used more in the K-12 space in education, and students are even using them to help for homework help, asking them questions related to the curriculum across English, social studies, math. Bots have all of that type of data and information. So it's really important for us to think about, okay, well, where are these bots getting that information, and who's deciding what that information should be, especially when we consider that these bots are rapidly growing in terms of access around the world and in many different types of forms. So we're going to do a little bot question and answer, and here you'll see a couple of different questions that a bot might get. And in the bold, you will see a couple of potential answers from a bot. So the first question is like, I might be using Siri or Alexa, and I might say, hey, bot, what ingredients do I need to make tacos? And maybe the bot will say back to me, you need ground beef, cheese, tomato sauce, and flour tortillas. Another question might be, hey, bot, what does it mean when a person gives you a pat on the back? And the bot might say back to me, it means you did a good job. And then a third prompt that we put up here is, hey, bot, what might be the best thing about visiting the United States? And the bot might say back, there are many natural attractions like the Grand Canyon. So we're going to take a couple minutes to reflect on this data, these pieces of data and these answers that the bot has given to these questions by me, the human. So what we'd love for you to do in the chat is reflect on those responses. Put in what you liked, what you like about some of these bot responses, what you wish about some of these bot responses, and what do you wonder about some of these bot responses. So I'll go back to the last slide and keep them up. And maybe in the chat, Jess, we can just put up the I like, I wish, I wonder, so everyone understands what to drop in. But I'll go back to the last slide. And just for each one, or you can pick one if you want, or two, but we'd love to hear from you. What do you like about some of these responses? What do you wish about some of these responses? And what do you wonder about some of these responses? And we'll give you a couple minutes to do that. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. And Ariam, I just want to catch up some of folks' reflections from the last time around. Someone emphasized culturally responsive teaching is not a nice to have. Love that that's something that stuck out for people. William said that algorithms are shaped by the culture that they are created in. Perfect there. Someone mentioned that even Lightroom isn't recognizing darker skinned people.
Yeah.
And someone said that bots are grading homework and assignments now, so just so embedded in education. And then someone offered that Algorithms of Oppression by Safia Umudrinobo is a must read. And I know we love her work. So.
We love her, absolutely. Oh, such great stuff in the chat. And looking forward to hearing the reflections on these responses.
Yeah, so some of the early ones coming in, someone said, well, can't eat beef. So that first response is just like, doesn't fit, right? From John wonders who is responsible for some of these responses. Melissa wonders how much ground beef. Love that, Melissa. Bob wonders that the second one differs from one to another culture. Meredith says, I wish the bot gave other options. Said you need meat or proteins. John, I wonder if the person is okay with another person touching them.
Yeah. Really good reflections. Fantastic.
And more will come in. We're on a bit of more will come in, but
yeah. Let's take a couple minutes here, and then we're gonna get into some hands-on bot making.
Okay, great response here from Nathan, who said language is a huge consideration. Something that they discuss with students in their IB preparing for the IB history exams is the inequity in sources chosen. Many of the questions or sources used may use slang and or expressions that are non-Western, that a non-Western student will likely not have engaged with. This is inherently unfair and culturally biased, and it concerns them, which is why they deliberately discuss it with students.
Oh, that's a fantastic reflection. Thank you so much for sharing that. Exactly.
And then William offered that while they like the way that information is accessible, they're wondering about how bots are manipulated.
That's fantastic. So with all those amazing, really amazing reflections, and having gone through what we like, what we wish, what we wonder, we want you to generate your own lines for these questions. So a human being might actually ask a bot, Alexa, Siri, Cortana, one of these questions. How would you respond? And you can respond with one sentence. You can respond with a question and a sentence, or a sentence and a question. But we want to, considering some of what came in through the chat, even if you want to even use some of those reflections, we want you to draft a couple of generate your own lines. And you can pick one, you can pick two, you can pick three, and drop them in the chat.
Yeah, and Kim and Meredith perfectly led you into that, Ariam, because they said, I wonder why the bot didn't ask more questions to provide better answers, or yeah, why doesn't it return with more questions about what you want to do or what part of the US, for example. So y'all are already on that right wavelength.
Yeah. So let's take a couple minutes here to generate your own lines.
Okay, we have a couple coming in so far for the first one, and I'm curious to see what folks have to say for the second and third, but here's a couple of the suggestions. From Renee, for the first question, what would you like as a protein? And then cycle through all the food groups and give examples. Renee also offered that the bot might also ask if they have any known allergies, right? Melissa offered that tacos can be made in a variety of ways. Here's a website where you can develop and choose a recipe. So offering another kind of resource. Bob offered that a taco generally contains a variety of ingredients. Some of the more common include a form of meat, such as beef, pork, or fish, that are accompanied by vegetables and sauces. All of these are placed in a shell that can be hard or soft, consistency that can be a hard or soft consistency, and is generally made from flour or corn. Okay, so getting into the second question, or actually here's another for the first. Here are some options for taco recipes. Please scroll through. The bot provides beef, chicken, bean, flour, corn options. Sade offered, what kind of tacos would you like to make? There are several varieties. Please follow this link for more information. Okay, so then for another question here, Melissa offered for the second that depending on your situation, a pat on the back could mean good job, or could just be choking, or you could just be choking, rather. Love that, Melissa. Meredith offered for number two, in some cultures, this might mean ... In other cultures, it might mean ... So the bot is pulling information and may offer some comparisons. Let's see. Oh, Nathan, for the third question, offered, "Hey there, let me know your personal interest and reasons for going to the United States, and I'll give you a few ideas." So,
Oh, I like that.
asking for more information. Melissa, for the third question, offered, "The United States is very diverse. What are your interests and what area interests you?"
Mm-hmm. You know what I love about so many of these responses, what you all are generating, instead of the original responses, it wasn't the human being asking the questions who was being centered. It was really the designer who's being centered, and the perspective of the designer. But what you all are doing is really centering the person asking the question, right? And centering what their perspective might be, what their background might be, what their cultural identity might be, which I think is a really wonderful shift that we're seeing in the lines you're generating.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I love this one from Sade. For the second one, "A pat on the back could mean several things. How did you feel after receiving that form of contact?" Great. Again, right to your point, Ariam, switching it to how the person felt, and maybe then offering some of the reasons that they felt that way. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Meredith offered a question for number 3. The best thing about visiting the United States is asking back what part of the United States and what time of year. Trino is very important as an East Coaster turned West Coaster. I know the importance of asking what time of year, because Ohio and Rhode Island and all those places in winter are not necessarily places you may want to visit.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Oh, another clarifying question for the third one. "To clarify, do you mean the United States of America? And if so, what region?" It's another great. Not making assumptions, right?
Exactly. So maybe we can, there might be more responses that come in, and I would love to continue to hear them. Maybe we can start now shifting into what are the responses that we're generating, what they might actually also mean about us, or reflecting on how we're thinking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. So we all have different aspects of our culture, right? There's surface level, there's shallow levels, there's deep levels, and each level impacts how we're interacting with the world around us. So as we're offering some of these bot responses, you all were already beginning to think of like, well, what would I want to hear? What's something that would really help me make the best decision? And we're going to dive into that more specifically, and think about, like, if we were building this from our cultural perspective, what might some of those responses be? Because if we think of all of ourselves as a community of coders, a community of programmers, if we have all these responses that are coming from all of our cultural lenses, we get a lot closer to the kind of nuance that we would want to see in the responses that a bot may provide or be able to provide, because it has all of that information and all of these sources from which to pull from.
Exactly.
So yeah, if we go to the next slide. So we're going to build out some of our cultural connections. So the slide before, you saw all the different connections and that network map that kind of overlaid the brain and our brains. And so we're going to build out what that looks like for each of us. So we're first going to start. I said at the beginning you would need a piece of paper and a pen. So if you don't have that, take a second to quickly grab that. And we're just going to start by either writing our names or drawing a little picture of ourselves in the middle of that piece of paper. So here's a little pixelated version of me. for inspiration. It does not have to be super high fidelity. Again, it can just be you writing out your name, but you can also add a little flair and do a quick drawing of yourself. So you're at the center of all of these connections that we're going to be building out. Okay, so hopefully by now folks have their paper and they've drawn themselves in the middle of their piece of paper or written their name in the middle of that piece of paper. So now let's go to this first level. We talked about the different levels of culture, right? So we're going to start building out this these first connections and pathways. So the first level is our surface level. Some of the things, this is not an exhaustive list, but some of the things that might be included in the surface level of our culture is things like songs, foods, which holidays are really central, important, what art we see in our day-to-day, and when we're at celebrations, when we're around family, when we're in our neighborhoods. Again, culture is constantly evolving, so it's not just how you were raised, it's the type of environments that you're in currently build some of your culture. The languages, the hairstyles, our clothes, the way in which we talk, the way in which we may code switch, right, in different situations. All of these are a part of the surface level of our culture. The ways we think about stories are, and what stories are really central. So from this first offshoot and kind of circle of networks, we're going to talk about, or you're going to draw or write, what are some of the things that for you culturally are at that surface level? And just because it's surface doesn't mean it's not important. It just means that these are the things that we may see more easily. It may come to mind more easily. So let's take about 30 seconds to a minute. You can draw as many offshoot bubbles as you want, and start to think through what are some of those surface level pieces.
And if you feel comfortable, definitely do share it in the chat. It'd be nice to see like the diversity of the diversity across folks' cultural trees.
Yeah, and a great question from Meredith around, should they each be their own bubble? So yes, Meredith, everything that you write should occupy its own bubble. And there could be some that are like further offshoots of another. So if I talked about what kind of music or songs were really important, I might put that in one bubble and then give some more specific examples. So if I were to build that one out, music that was really, really important in my household growing up was lots of kind of Motown and soul. And maybe a connection that I'd make as an offshoot for that is that it was Saturday morning cleaning music. So now on Saturday mornings, I still will play some of that music, and it gets me into a particular kind of like headspace. For hairstyles, I might say, within my culture, Black culture, there's kind of natural curly, kinky styles. There's braids. There's weaves and kind of wigs and afros. There's just so much diversity. So I could say which pieces of those hairstyles have been important for me as I've developed. Great question, Meredith. Okay, so let's move on to the next level here. So now we're in shallow, and again, these are just like the naming conventions, but don't think that it means that these are less important. So some of the examples for shallow culture might be your tempo of work, beauty standards, going back to Ariam's example earlier, around an AI bot deciding who who was beautiful and what answers or things like that were the most favorable. Acceptable food sources and what you may eat. So more than just in the first shallow example, if I said soul food, but then on food sources, it could be something different there. Ways that we navigate emotion, some nonverbal communications. So if we think about that pat on the back, if we think about a hug or a nod that someone may give to you as they're passing you in the street, what do some of those things mean? What have been some that have been important to you? Our concepts of time, our theories of wellness, what it means to be healthy, and things like that are all things that may, again, not an exhaustive list, but all things that may fall within the shallow level of our culture. These are things that when there is cultural mismatch, you begin to see some more friction. These are more embedded in how we trust one another and how we build a sense of respect and relationship. Okay, from that first level, I see for Melissa, she had Appalachian, fifth generation farmer, hunting. For music, there's Johnny Cash, holidays, there's Christmas in there. From Nathan and his first bubble, we have music. His mother played folk music, listened to rap and heavy metal, spent time with friends in both kind of divides. So I love that, Nathan, because that's then beginning to think about ways in which cultures can sometimes seem like there's a chasm between them, and ways in which we may begin to bridge some of those chasms, or ways in which we just have to respect that they are in different places. It's an amateur musician now. Playing in a band, love that. From Kim, her brother and she were recently joking about Saturday morning cleaning music. So yes, we align there. Even if we may not be from the same, and I don't know because I can't see you all, right? But even if we're not in the same, from the same kind of cultural backgrounds, and we haven't had the same cultural experiences, there's something that we share, which is really powerful. So you're all writing and drawing some of the shallow levels of your culture now. What are some of those nonverbals? How was emotion handled at different stages of your life, and how have you processed that since?
It's funny, Jess, I'm thinking about the nonverbal communication here. So one thing I've definitely adopted from my parents' culture is when you greet someone, you kiss them 3 times on the cheek. So it's like, mwah, mwah, mwah. And you can never, it always has to be 3 times. And if you miss that one time, it's not an insult, but it's like, you have to always make that third kiss on the cheek. And when I've traveled to other countries, sometimes I forget it's just 2 kisses and I go for the third and the person's really confused. And so those cultural misunderstandings and how they're interpreted are so fascinating.
Mm-hmm. Right. And again, that shows that those are pieces that then, if that's a first impression, for example, that can be the foundation of a relationship. Not to put too much pressure on it, but these are things that we are all either consciously or unconsciously thinking about. And so making some of that conscious and understanding that this is the foundation of how all of us walk through the world is so essential to having deeper understanding and appreciation for one another.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. Okay, so let's go. Maybe some folks will add into the chat some of the things that ended up at their shallow level, and let's go to the deep level of culture. Okay, so we're deep now, folks. We're thinking about spirituality, our concept of higher powers, our notions of what's fair, what's good, what's bad, our concepts, or if there is a good and bad, right? our concepts of ourselves, and what makes up our self-view, our world views, how we make decisions, our relationship to nature. Again, not an exhaustive list here, but these are some of the things that really get to our core, right? And if we're at kind of these core levels, can really be places where deep misunderstandings of this, or not acknowledging this, or bringing it up, can cause harm. Now we're at that level that Ariam was mentioning with the bots, where there's no awareness at some of these deeper levels, and therefore where there's things that are deeply culturally misaligned with many of us. So yeah, begin to think about what are some of the things on the deep end of your culture. I see some things coming in from the shallow, so I'll just read that out as folks are beginning to fill out the deep web piece of their culture. For shallow, Robert said that they tend to show appreciation and thanks with a hug, and often forget that some people aren't comfortable with that contact, or don't read the hug in the same way as they intend. Kim said one thing about, or a couple things for shallow, is that the style of working that they prefer is collaborative. For beauty standards, natural beauty is really valued, and for food, sustainably sourced. That's value. Nathan, for the shallow side, they've been told in years past that they're suspicious, and had to agree to that and have worked on that. They're in a bicultural marriage, and so they do have cultures and languages collide once in a while. Love wins all the time, of course. Love that, Nathan. And their partner doesn't think that they're suspicious. That's just a note that their partner doesn't think they're suspicious. That was from another colleague. But that is, it's just funny to think about in some of the closest relationships that we have, even the closest relationships we have with people who share the same race as us, share the same age range as us. This is why culture cannot just be synonymous for race, because it includes so many of our experiences, again, getting to those behaviors, beliefs, and norms. And we all experience behaviors, beliefs, and norms in a different way. Okay, so folks are jotting down things for some of that are at their deep level of culture. What do you think is fair? What are some of the values that, if you meet someone that doesn't share those values, it's immediately like, oh, I don't know if I can, be in relationship with this person. Okay, I'm seeing something. So let's take a couple more seconds to wrap up that. And I'm seeing a response from Melissa, and then I'll hand it back over to you, Ariam, to say what we'll do with our network and our cultural web that we've all created.
Great.
So for Melissa, on the deep end, they said for spirituality, God, family first, that they're a fact seeker, a reader. For nature, they want to do no harm, and are against littering. For fairness, sometimes there's a gray area, but treat others as they would want to be treated. For Nathan, at the deep level, they've been learning more about racism and trying to find their own racist tendencies that they don't know about, and trying to be an ally. Have been reading books rooted in anti-racism, right? For Kim, at the deep level for religion, there's Christian personal relationship with God and influenced by the African-American church and Quakerism and yoga. And the, hopefully I say this right, the commensal spirit, commensal, I don't know. But everyone can read it, so everyone can pronounce it right. And Kim believes it's important to understand others on their own terms. Wow, that's so important, Kim, right? So their relationship to self and nature has evolved as they've aged and they've transitioned from being able-bodied to being mobility impaired, right? So that's bringing the point that you got to, Ariam, about how our identities influence the ways and influence our culture and vice versa. Like this is all like a continuous flow of race, identity, culture, and kind of the outside influences that we see. Yeah. Oh, love this intention from Robert for the importance of nature and the environment. Take only memories and leave only footprints.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay, Ariam, what does this all have to do? Again, like bring us back to how we can all be designers and programmers and influence the emerging technology that's coming up in the world.
Yeah. So let me keep us here for a minute. So thank you so much, Jess, for taking us through that really rich activity. What's so important about this is there's two really important pieces of what we just did, what Jess just took us through. One is, and I think a lot of you did this really nicely in terms of reflecting on the bot prompts that we saw earlier, these prompts here. It's really thinking about the AI beauty bot, the example that I gave earlier. Oftentimes, designers, we center ourselves and our cultural experiences, and we're not always centering those who are not, whose perspectives we might not completely understand or have ever engaged with. And that can do a lot of harm because then we're creating and designing, whether it's algorithms, products, data sets like these. These are pieces of data, right? We're designing data that's going into the world and is highly influential. And it's not necessarily representative. And what I loved about the reflection piece was you all put into the chat, you went from centering the designer to centering many different types of people by asking questions and trying to understand who's the person who's asking the question and what might their interests be or their background be, so that they're getting a response that's more catered to them. And that's really important. So that's one piece of doing this activity that Jess took us through, is understanding what are our different, what is that scaffolding when it comes to our, cultural identities and, the way that our cultural software works. It's really important to recognize that, because if we're not conscientious of it, then we're not going to really be aware of how our cultural biases seep into the things that we create and design. So that's one important piece of it. The other really important piece of it, which is what we're going to get into now, is our cultural software is a superpower in the sense that to make sure that we engage students who are often on the outskirts or who are excluded. This is especially from when it comes to learning how to engage with tech, learning how to design technology, this is a great exercise to use to support them and tap into their identities and cultural values to design with technology, which is often missing in the STEM space. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to take the cultural trees that Jess has just helped us build, and now really center ourselves as if we were going to support our students to center them, right? So we're going to try this again, but instead of centering, a random person who might ask these questions, take your cultural tree and really try to center yourself. And you can even, if you like, you can even hack up the bot questions if you feel you need to, but insert responses that really represent your cultural tree, right? And this is an activity that you can run with your students. That's meant to be a little bit subversive, where if there's, those original bot responses are things that they wouldn't engage with or they wouldn't understand, how would they rewrite or redesign it according to their cultural tree? And so we're going to take a little bit of time and ask you to do this. So you could do it for one of these prompts. You could do it for all of the prompts. But take your cultural tree, think about these questions, and design your own original response from your perspective, from your cultural software, and share it in the chat with us.
And again, if you're thinking, well, then it still will be super directed, but just to me, the point is now we're building this community of programmers. So again, we're giving the bot a whole bunch of new data points that it can pull from, rather than just having those standard responses that Ariam offered at the top.
Exactly. And this is a way to kind of, a part of this exercise, there's two pieces of this exercise, recognizing our cultural software and like what are the cultural perspectives, right, that we don't have, and what are the cultural perspectives and identities and experiences that we do hold. And so I think being conscientious of that is really important, especially as we engage with our students and support them to make and create with technology. And in your response, if you can tie it to a piece of your cultural software, that's also really cool. So you can identify where this is coming from for you.
Okay, so I have a response from Robert from number 2. A pat can mean several things. It can be a demonstration of appreciation. It might be a way of showing affection, or simply to get the attention of the person receiving the pat. Ooh, from Kim on the ingredients to make a taco. Kim offered use Impossible ground beef burger, or ground burger, tomatoes, shredded lettuce, onions, cheese, salsa, corn tortillas, sour cream or guacamole optional. And see, if it was me on the bot, it'd be sour cream and guacamole essential. So see how the different data points can lead to different things. Melissa for tacos said tacos are made of venison, taco seasoning, corn, cheese, and flour tortillas. Right, so we're pulling in all these.
Yeah, I love it. You're seeing who you are.
Exactly. And I'm sure more are going to be coming in soon, but those are a couple that have come so far. Yeah, really interesting to see how you all are taking levels of your culture tree and applying it to these questions. So Nathan for number 3 said, the United States is a culturally diverse country with diverse people and ideas. Museums and cultural sites across the country will teach you about the indigenous peoples and all others who came to the country afterwards. Really appreciate that. Yeah, Erin, for you, coming from your perspective, what would you say the best thing about visiting the United States would be?
I would say, I'd probably say the best thing about visiting the United States is the diversity of people and their characteristics across the United States, whether you're in the South, the Pacific Northwest, the East Coast. I think that's what I would say. I would say that the people of the United States are as diverse as its like terrain, and you never know what kind of day you might have depending on where you are. You never know what your experience will be.
So true. Yeah, I think I'd have to say something about food and nature. I think they're right up there for me. I really appreciated Nathan's point about, learning about the indigenous peoples whose land that we might be on in different natural sites, especially some of the beautiful natural parks, which unfortunately can be over some sacred ground. So yeah, taking in the beauty and also recognizing and hopefully supporting folks who are still here, who don't get to access and steward the land in the way that they may want to. But then to your point around diversity, just like being able to, in a single city, experience so many different types of food, and that in those spaces being an extension of the culture, the music that's played there, the loudness or quietness of folks in the space, spaces with elders are just really lovely places to be. Okay, a couple more responses have come through. For Robert, tacos consist of a form of seafood as cooked in a spicy sauce combined with a form of cheese, lettuce, avocado, tomatoes, and onions. Other toppings can be included as well. These ingredients are wrapped in a soft flour shell. As Sade for number 2 said, if someone's patting you on the back, they were probably trying to congratulate you, unless you were choking. So again, bringing in, love that caveat there. And for number 3, so I say, if you mean the USA, there's going to be all different kinds of people and cultures and lifestyles that you get to see and might want to engage with. For John, said there can be lots of interesting ingredients to make a taco, so don't be afraid. We'll work together on planning the best ingredients for your tacos. How many tacos do you want to make? And as we move forward, do you prefer beef, chicken, fish, or a plant-based meat as your protein? Do you have any questions about this first step? I love that re-engagement there, John, of bringing you back in. So even though it was geared towards you, there was another level of engagement to continue to ask those questions. Let me see. Kim said the best thing about visiting the U.S. might be its size and diversity. The terrain, flora, fauna, and cultures vary widely. By going to the part of the U.S. that are very different from each other, it can help you understand some of the differences between its various people. And Francis said, having never visited the U.S., it's interesting to hear our different perspectives. Nathan offered that in major cities, like in the U.S. and Canada, major cities in the U.S. and Canada are like traveling the world. When Nathan heads back home to visit Canada, they often travel via the U.S. and check out cool places and people. Nathan right now lives in Japan. Melissa, the best part about the United States is being able to move across a diverse nation freely and to see all the fascinating landmarks, national parks, forests, and meet people from various cultures, urban and rural. Nice.
And if you haven't visited the United States, that's also why we frame the question, what might be the best thing? So feel free, if you've ever imagined it, or if you've not imagined it, what do you think might be the best thing about visiting the U.S. from your perspective, or not? So please feel free to engage in that question. You don't have to have ever come to the US.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great points. Yeah, I think like with so many places, what can be really important is trying to get beyond, or what I would want to do is to try to get a little beyond what are kind of the standard things to do, because often, you know, different, yeah, just different tourist things can have so many different histories there. And get to like what do folks who live here really appreciate about this area? What do you all see? What are some of your favorite things to engage in? And then try to engage in that in the most like ethical or responsible way possible.
Yeah. Jess,
And
I'm curious
I mean, a
how
big
you
piece
would
of that is
respond.
also if folks don't want you visiting. We're seeing that a lot with coronavirus right now. Some people are saying, please respect us by not visiting, right? So that's another important thing about how we respect the folks who, for this is their home, not just a place to visit.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we can move on. I'm not seeing too much more coming through the chat right now.
Okay. So I think we're getting close to...
Oh, Ariam, you're a little quiet. I don't know if you're covering your mic or something.
No, can you hear me?
I can. You're a little quiet, but maybe it's good for
Okay.
other people.
Oh, I wonder what's going on. Okay, I'll just speak a little bit. I'll make sure I speak up. So thank you everyone for sharing out. It was great to hear how you applied your own cultural tree to these bot responses. And it, as Jess said, it's we created a much more diverse data set by getting the perspective of so many others and pulling in that everyone's different cultural schemas. So thank you so much for sharing out. I think we're getting close to time, and we wanted to start to close with a closing reflection. What did you, if there was something you used to think before this session, please share. If there's something that you think now, please share. And I might kick off with a closing reflection. I will say that before I really engaged as much in thinking about emerging tech, I used to think that technologies were pretty like black box, which they still are. We don't really know how they're designed or what goes into them. But now I think we have a lot more agency as educators and with our students to create experiences with and around technology that are really personal to us. And I think it's just about learning how to create those experiences for ourselves and our students.
Okay, just a few more logistical questions before we get to the use to think now, I think. Helen is just excited to share, or I guess this isn't logistical, just excitement. Thank you, Helen. Excited to share this with students when they do their AI bias unit. Helen, we are excited that you have an AI bias unit. Like that's already so important.
Great. Before we close, so we have resources we're going to share after this closing reflection. So we will share about that. So glad to hear that, though. That's fantastic.
Robert would love the activity about this to use with their students. So is it written down somewhere? That's where we're about to go next. In this next 9 minutes that we have before we close. Okay, so now some of the used to thinks and now I thinks. From Kim, I used to think that a discussion of culture and code had to be technical. Now I think it can be made very accessible.
That's great.
Yeah, one of the most important things I've learned from Ariam, and Ariam, correct me if I say it wrong, but just I often thought these things were emerging technology was just too technical, or there's no way it can be broken down. And Ariam really offered that you don't have to necessarily know how to code. Like, I don't need to become a program, but it's really important that I know how the code works so that I can be in the conversation and in just in deeper relationship with these with emerging tech as it's being built. Don't have to be able to do all the zeros and ones. See, now I'm probably saying something non-relevant, but I don't have to do all the things to be able to know what's important.
Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Let's see. So Melissa said that they used to think about just designing, but now they're thinking about designing for the visually impaired, color contrast. And recently they've taken a lot of DI workshops, and this has helped them see how they can translate that into design. Nice.
Nice.
Twana said, how important is it to recognize that we live in a small world with very different people from very different backgrounds? That their little sliver of the world is very different from everybody else's, and we need to keep that in mind with everything we build, design, teach, etc. So important, Twana.
So important.
Nathan can't come up with the used to think now. I think that's okay. But he appreciated that the scaffolding and the approach, the surface, shallow, and deep culture, that language and cultural bias is coming to mind. Please, yes, shamelessly rip off some of the ideas today. Yeah. Give credit, to us, and especially to Zaretta Hammond, who I always just frame it as literally wrote the book on culture, our brains, neuroscience, and what it has to do with teaching. And maybe I'll just offer these last two from, or maybe just one from John. So John, I used to think about how I could bring the discussion of culture and code into the classroom. And now I think that the culture tree exercise is a good format for bringing it to students, right? Like, how can we break down? Again, it's about making these processes that naturally happen a little bit more conscious so that we understand and can more intentionally make some of those connections. So everybody right now, I hope you've made some connection between what we've offered and something in your life. That's why we bring in those rich examples around Siri or Alexa, or any other type of bot that you've interacted with, anything that you've asked a question to. It's why we bring in the examples of being able to connect it to your food, to your sense of right and wrong, all these different things.
And thinking about other emerging technologies. So today we explored bots, but even if we think about, the Adobe community is all across the world. So if we think about other emerging technologies like driverless cars, right? When we think about driverless cars, like people drive in all parts of the world, right? And driving culture is very different. The rules on the road are very different in different cultures. When I lived in Kenya, the culture around driving is very different than the United States. So if we think about driverless cars that are really being primarily developed here, against which cultural rules? And how are those cars going to work if they are, exported to other countries? Are they going to adopt the cultural rules and values of other countries? So I think there's so many ways in which we can think about culture and computing and code across so many different emerging technologies. And it's so important now, because if we don't, then there will be a dominant culture or a dominant narrative that excludes many of us. And I think that's what's at the core of this work that we are sharing with you today.
And I just want to, one of the kind of mic drop comments from Francis in the chat here is, I don't see the first I used to think part of it, but Francis is now I think it's about people rather than technology.
Love that.
Yeah, and the way that people are building the technology and what access we have to influence the technology, right?
Exactly. That's such a big part of it. So critical.
So Ariam, do we want to talk about where people can find us and any further resources?
Yeah. So before we close, Jess and I wanted to share two pieces of work that also come together that we're working on in the K12 Lab. Jess, do you want to share about Learning to Learn?
Yeah. So Ariam and I both had fellowships at the Stanford D School. My fellowship was not surprisingly focused on the intersections of neuroscience and culture and how we as people learn, just based on so much research that has been emergent in the past couple of years and even within the past decade, and creating different tools to help bring some of that research and knowledge into the classroom in accessible ways. So just knowing that some of these big studies, 300 plus pages, like we don't always have time for that. And I was lucky enough to be given a year of time to really dive into that and think about and create some tools that bring the best of what we know about learning science and culture into some form. So what you saw today were some GIFs that I've created. There are also some longer form videos that I've created. I've also made some different kind of boot camps and different learning experiences. And that's all within kind of the Learning to Learn umbrella within the K12lab.org site. Ariam, do you want to share about REP?
Yeah. And so alongside Justice Fellowship, I was also in the K12 Lab as a fellow working on a portfolio of resources for educators and students around emerging technologies, how we make the concepts that underpin these emerging technologies more accessible to everyone so we can all participate in shaping what these technologies can do to make sure they're as equitable as possible, and really thinking about the bias piece in technology and how bias in technology is representative of human bias and cultural bias, which is why our work, there's a lot of synergy and a natural alignment between the emerging tech and Learning to Learn work. And we have a magazine that's dropping, the first issue that's dropping September around Labor Day. It's called REP, and it's a hands-on analog magazine. And there will be around 5 to 6 issues around a different type of emerging technology with different activities and collages that young people can cut out and mix and make with. And the first issue is all about voice bots. So you experienced a little bit of that today, but there's a lot more in the first issue of REP. And if you'd like to learn more, on the next slide, I'm going to put up the website. But yeah, we'd love for you to sign up and learn more. And this is where you can reach us. We're at those are our Twitter handles. That's the K12 Lab site. And if you're interested in learning more about REP, that is the link where you can sign up and learn more.
Great. Hey, Jennifer.
Hi there. I'm going to pop in. We've had an incredible dialogue in the chat. Thank you to you both so much. I think this was a very moving session, and there's a lot of people asking about opportunities for staying connected, and even some asking about opportunities to have you join in with presenting. So thank you for sharing your contact information. I have Jess's email. Let me pop back over to that chat and drop that there. And then Ariam's as well. I'm getting pretty good at this, like copy paste. I'm copy pasting a lot in the last 2 hours. Okay, here we go. So there's Ariam's and there's Jess's. So I've shared your contact information. Make sure after this session to pop over to Twitter, because I think you're going to have a lot more people following you there and wanting to connect. But thank you so much. This will be recorded. So anyone that joined in later, feel free to check out the recording and keep connected with Ariam and Jess. And thank you both so much for all of the incredible work you are doing to impact education for today and for the future. So with that, we can head back over to the Learning Lobby, where we will hear from our third keynote speaker with Nicholas Ferroni and Clara. So thanks everyone for being a part of this Create session, and we will see you all very soon. Be well.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.